Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to the minigame podcast. Today is Monday, August 4th. Starting a little bit later. Probably don't have much of an excuse for that even. Just probably my best excuse would be that I didn't run my YouTube Shorts pre-setup macro, I guess is what it should be called, after the last stream. And so I ran that and then ran my macros to open all the news today, which those two things in a row made things take a little bit longer. Plus I'm also staying up all night playing PC building simulator, which we'll talk about that in a second. Meanwhile, while we are warming up, I'll scroll down the 24-hour peak concurrent player list from SteamDB, and then we'll jump into video game news hopefully in about 30 minutes if we can. Like, as far as warm up goes, I guess I really don't have too much to say. It's the same old. I did start to do a little bit of progress on the weekend after last week being a pretty awful week for me, as far as just not accomplishing any of the cleaning, decluttering that has been my life for the past, feels like a year now. It's probably been less than that. But yeah, I started to pack up some of my Lego sets, massive Lego collection that honestly there is room for perhaps doing a culling of my Lego sets, but there also, as I started moving things around, I'm recognizing that my nieces and nephews have messed up the sets quite a bit, which isn't really a big deal. Like, inherently they are toys and they're expected the kids would play with toys, and you are getting into a level of insanity when you start putting velvet ropes or glass in front of toys, even if they are expensive toys or old toys. I can see certainly a museum doing that, but really at a certain point, if I went to a Lego museum, I'd expect that I'd be touching a lot of Lego, which weirdly is, I think, less true than it really would be if you went to the official Lego museum in Sweden or something. Now, if you go to the Lego amusement parks, Lego lands of different places, you do touch a lot of Legos. But even then, there's still a lot of things that are either glued down and touchable or behind barriers that are non-touchable. Regardless, yeah, my Legos are in a messy state, and I don't know if I'm ever going to have time in my life to undo that mess. And I have just far too many sets that are still in boxes even, which does make them easier to move around, I suppose. So yeah, that's about as much as I accomplished, I think, over the weekend. I did laundry and maybe did some dishes, and I took out the trash earlier today. And all of these sound like terribly small things, I know, but for someone who is tired all the time, frankly, each one of those is a small victory to not be undersold. Interesting. We have some new contenders. Titan Quest 2, Eternal Return. Witcher 3 is really low, but not super surprising that it's really low either. Yeah. And still just spending a lot of time watching YouTube, and maybe a little less time watching streaming, which is probably a good thing, but I probably shouldn't be watching either one as much as I am. In anticipation of the Hellraiser revival game that's been announced, I watched Hellraiser 2, which is just like a direct sequel to Hellraiser 1. And yeah, there's, I think I may have already talked about that even on a stream. Both of those series, those first two movies, really establish something fairly different from what is in the minds of the fandom of the Hellraiser series, which is funny because what's really in the minds of the fandom of the Hellraiser series is not firmly established, I think, in any of the movies. Unfortunately, my streaming experience seems like it's going to stop at Hellraiser 2, because it seems to me like Hellraiser 3 and further are all only available for purchase on like Amazon Prime Video and other streaming services. They are not free to stream with ads, and none of those movies are really worth it to pay for. And if I was going to pay for them, then I'd probably be looking for some kind of like Blu-rays or DVDs of them, and honestly, the quality of those movies, just the fidelity of how they were filmed, is going to make it questionable whether even a Blu-ray would actually look good for the Hellraiser series. Of course, I'm exempting the Hulu streaming movie reboot, which I think the fandom still would like to see a sequel to that as just like an alternative timeline telling. And I wouldn't be surprised if the video game also just establishes this idea of there being Hellraiser branded things that are set in their own medium, and Hulu being a streaming service being a different medium than just any other TV and movies. But yeah, I think that's probably going to be it for me talking about Hellraiser for a while until the game actually comes out, at which point, unfortunately, there is sadly a decent chance that the game will be much like Agony, or in many ways it might be like Agony, where it says it's going to come out highly uncensored, and then all of a sudden it comes out censored, and then 6 months later you have Agony unrated that is mostly uncensored but still a little censored. And in both cases, Agony as a game sold itself very much more on controversy than on being a great game experience. Which, yeah, all of that feels like real possibilities. I guess I could quickly go through the Hellraiser movies from what I vaguely remember from them. Or, you know what I could do is I could bring up and show and not tell the Hellraiser movie series Wikipedia, and then we could go through the list without me having to stutter and think about things, assuming this is actually going to work. My internet was having trouble, and yeah, definitely doesn't seem like it wants to really work. Okay. I never came back and fixed this, did I? We'll hit Control A and highlight everything. So, the US release date is going to be potentially interesting here for the Hellraiser movies. And we can see the box office. And I think for the most part, after the first two, you're going to just see completely different producers and completely different writers. Clive Barker really only was involved with the first movie, and you're going to see probably numbers just go down and down and down if they even mention them But yeah, Clive Barker is involved with the video game at some level. So you have like Hellraiser 1 in 1987, very, very early, and very much feels like an early horror movie, pushing it as far as they can. Probably heavily influenced by video nasties in the UK, Clive Barker probably being heavily influenced by that. And specifically, he said he was taken to a S&M club, which in part influenced the Hellbound Heart novel, which Hellraiser is based on in Hellraiser. And then it is within a year, with using a lot of the same footage from the first movie, that you get Hellbound Hellraiser 2. And then it is quite a much longer time in 1992 before you get Hellraiser Hell on Earth, Hellraiser 3. But yeah, doing pretty good in the numbers and sales. And then Hell on Earth is, for the most part, a continuation of the events of the first two movies. But I don't think it has any of the characters from the first two movies. They have their happy endings as far as who actually survives in the first two movies, and then everybody else ends. And then, weirdly, between 1988 and 1992, that 6 years, or 4 years, can't do math, seemed like they were still behind it and trying to keep it, but at some point, the company that owned the publishing company, the developer, whatever, that owned the rights to the brand, started to just kind of churn out things consistently almost every 4 years to hold on to the rights. Whereas there's an alternative timeline, I imagine, where if they hadn't made Hell on Earth, then the rights may have reverted back to Clive Barker, and then you would have had a much better series potentially happen. By the time you're at 4, though, Bloodline is a prequel, and that's in 1996. It's a prequel and also set in the future in space, and is actively ending the story of the Hellraiser series. And so it's just like ruining it completely as far as the idea of continuing the main narrative. Here you have an Alan Smithy fake credit for the director, so even the director didn't want to be known by it. And you can see even at that, though, it still made $9 million. And then when you get into Inferno, I honestly don't remember which one Inferno is. And the text is impossible to read. Inferno, if I was to guess, probably is the one where it's a cop chasing after this killer for the entire movie, and you basically don't even see the Hellraiser Cenobites except for in small flashes for maybe 20 minutes of the movie, and it only really produces the Hellraiser type scenes right at the end. That's the movie I'm thinking of. That's actually not a bad movie at all, but it probably shouldn't have been a Hellraiser movie. It could have just been a cop movie. It certainly could have been like just a cop chasing after the Zodiac killer, or a Saw movie if Saw existed in 2000, which it didn't. But yeah, that one wasn't too bad. But then Hellseeker, 2 more years later, I don't even know which one this would be. This is when you start to get to the point where these movies were coming out more on HBO or Sci-Fi Channel. You just lose the entire serial numberized level of them. Just like you could shuffle up all of these movies and they'd be the same. Hellworld, I distinctively remember watching on Sci-Fi in 2005, coming out the same year as Deader. Interesting there. So they've been paced out by at least a couple of years, and then they started to speed up. So this probably was 2 movies, and this one is just like a bunch of kids at a party that were playing on an online app. And again, it's another movie where Pinhead and the Cenobites and Hellraiser really only shows up in small flashes and then barely is even in the movie. Yeah, I couldn't even tell you what Deader is about. And then you have the long gap after Hellworld to Revelations, which is a completely different Pinhead character there and was awful. And then yeah, this one was basically shot in a house after a couple kids like killed a prostitute in Cancun, Mexico or something, I think was the story there. It really was bad and was only done to keep the rights. This is definitely the era where they were making just absolute garbage movies to keep the rights. And after Revelations was Judgment, which Judgment's also pretty terrible. Another actor playing Pinhead. And really, it's not even a Hellraiser movie. It is something that easily could have been something else, but even then, if it was done by somebody else, it would have probably been something closer to like the Human Centipede, as far as an indie, gross out kind of low budget movie. And this is Judgment is where they introduce an actual angel and do a twist which inherently potentially kills off Pinhead as a character completely, ruining the series even worse than Bloodlines did, which Bloodlines managed somehow not to ruin the series despite trying to end it for several sequels. And yet, obviously these are movies that were making a couple million, at least, enough to justify keeping the rights, or it may very well have just been the production companies were losing monies and writing off losses by making these movies with their Hollywood math. And then you have the reboot Hulu movie, which was, let's see, pretty good, but the estimate here is that it literally only made $12,000. I assume that is probably because it aired in some small theater outside of Hulu. The concept of people in the Hell and Hellraiser, which is in the comic books expanded to be not the Christian hell, or at least maybe a separate layer of the Christian hell, there is like a real hell in the comics that's different, so it's better referred to as the Leviathan's Maze, I would think. People escaped that in the first 2 movies, and they become kind of catalysts in part of what's going on. But by the 3rd movie, they kind of jump around, and yeah. Guess we could skim over all of this if we were going to talk about Hellraiser for a lot longer than I think anybody cares, which I imagine there is a lot of people that just are like, there's no way I'd watch these movies, which is fair, certainly, in that the idea of watching these horror movies both requires you to be into some really old, cheap-looking, gory graphics and a lot of violence and sex. And even if you are into horror movies, you might be more into something like Saw or any other of the maybe simpler series that are only slightly scary, although there really isn't a lot of gap material. Like if you're watching the Nightmare on Elm Street series, it's the same kind of feeling. I think that's what a lot of people who immediately just would never even give horror movies don't consider, is that most of these movies started off in the 80s and are pretty cheesy and have that cheesy feeling. Only more recently have you had horror movies take themselves really seriously. The Hellraiser Hulu reboot is an example of that, and like more recent Saw movies are an example of that. And yeah, it very well might be a different kind of audience, but the vast majority of the audience are just not even going to give it a try. Bloodline is probably the one movie I haven't actually even sat through. It was released direct to video in the UK and had a theatrical release. And then Inferno is probably, I think that's the one to watch. You watch that first, it will give you a general separate story in which you don't really have to understand anything about the puzzle box or Pinhead. And then Hellseeker, I don't know if I've even watched this one. Somebody ends up in a car accident 1 month later. Oh yeah, I've watched that one, but a lot of Hellseeker, which I think was a pretty decent movie too, mixes up in my mind with Inferno. I think Inferno is a little bit better, but you do have kind of a jump here of fairly decent ones. And then Deader, oh yeah, is the underground cult that, again, Pinhead and the Cenobites show up very rarely, and that they're used very, very rarely. And then Hellworld is supposed to be taking place in the real world, where Hellraiser franchise has spawned a successful MMORPG, which, I mean, we might be going full circle here in that there is a video game here. And then yeah, Revelations was apparently shot for 2 weeks for a $300,000 budget. It was released in a single theater in California for a crew showing. It was suggested that it was only shot so that the Weinstein Company would not lose the filming rights before it could produce a remake of the original. The film was released in DVD format in 2011. So yeah, I guess that's perhaps the elephant in the room, is that the Weinstein Company owned a lot of movie series, and the Hellraiser series is involved there. So who knows if I think I heard a lot of like Middle Eastern companies bought the rights from Weinstein from his movies, although I'm not sure they bought the Hellraiser film series. But I would bet it's not in Weinstein's name, and that he probably isn't getting any residuals or anything from it because his name is Mud. But who knows? This video game might have a whole controversy around it. Judgment. Yeah. And they as far as Judgment, they wouldn't even let Doug Bradley, the original Pinhead, read the script without signing a non-disclosure agreement regarding its contents, which, in fairness, is pretty standard but it was really just done in kind of a nasty way, from what I understand, to just tell Doug Bradley, we know you're going to hate on this script. We know you're not going to like it. So let's just send you a non-disclosure and say, well, you refused to sign it, thus we didn't hire you. But that, I don't think they wanted to hire him anyways. Now, noticeably, Clive Barker did promote, according to Wikipedia, the Hulu movie. Dimension Films being involved, so it is assuming by the time 2022 happened, the franchise rights had gotten away from the Weinstein Company, and that, I think, allows for some improvement. Now, let's see. Apparently a TV series, I don't know how in the world where you could make a TV series for the Hellraiser series. It's yet to be produced. It was announced in 2025, so they are working on it. And I guess if you wanted to read the novel-length sequel, The Scarlet Gospels is the name. Yeah. Then there's a Hellraiser The Toll novel before that. Yeah. Then there was a whole bunch of comics made. Like years where they were published during the height of enthusiasm around the series. Doing it in comic form, I imagine, probably makes a lot of sense to not run into as much problems with depicting things or censorship. Yeah. And Pinhead was in Dead by Daylight. And then there was probably a long list of unknown sequels and films and things. Super 3D Noah's Ark originated as a Hellraiser license for Nintendo Entertainment System. During the course of its development, the games abandoned the Hellraiser license and converted it to a simplified game based on the Bible. I feel like that's not true, but that is funny, to say at least, going full 180. We're also looking at making a video game, which would have been an early video game from the time frame, Super NES. Weinstein Company tried to do a bunch in 2011. Alright, so that's my journey around the Hellraiser series. Instead of wasting a bunch of time watching the Hellraiser series, I instead wasted a bunch of time just reminding myself of the series. Which, it is worth pointing out, there is more bad than there is good. There. Like, for historical purposes, I say watch the first 3 movies and then probably skip to just a Hulu movie, and that's about all you really need to watch. If you really love the series, then you just watch them all in chronological order, but maybe skip the last 2, and a lot of those are going to be bad, and you can certainly get into more details about like skipping Hell World or some of the others. But yep, it very much became an anthology series after the first 4 movies, and each movie stands around on its own weight, and most do not stand on their own weight. Which definitely, back to video games, questions how that video game will really be. It's almost certainly going to just tell you a tale. It's going to be a lot like the Silent Hill series, in that Silent Hill 3 is not really connected to Silent Hill 2, and Silent Hill 2 is not really connected to Silent Hill 1. And there's just going to be some connecting thread, as it were. I wish there was more enthusiasm around the Hellraiser game, but I mean, it's justifiable not to be enthusiastic around something like that. I hope it's great. I hope it's really got to be one of those games that just surprises people as being great and brings in more of an audience. Video games are a big tent. I like to say that phrase quite a bit, but horror fans are already a small tent, so a fraction of a small tent of horror fans playing horror video games is probably not going to get you too much sales. Like, if in the first year of Hellraiser Reviver coming out, it could sell a million units, I think that alone would be good enough. Like, you really can't expect it to keep pace with something like Clair Obscur, Expedition 33 even, which is in itself its own niche as far as a French game and an RPG in a JRPG style. But honestly, even 300,000 or 500,000 units shipped feels like a good thing. So let's talk about PC Building Simulator now, since I've spent 20 minutes talking about Hellraiser and losing most of my audience, I'm sure, if I have any audience at all. I have been getting a few more views for Cracking the Cryptic, which does make an argument that since I'm already doing the Cracking the Cryptic YouTube videos as they come out, that I would probably be better if I went back and played video game form, and at some point if I did all the puzzles in the video game form, even thinking about the possibility of just doing the newest of the Cracking the Cryptic puzzles, but that would take a lot of time and be a huge commitment. But yeah, I'm not good at them though. I think people are going to see that proves itself to be the case further and further into that series, so I'm assuming I'm just going to start losing views, although I might be getting a ton of watch time. I can't help but feel like I also was in a pretty bad mental state when I was recording those Cracking the Cryptic videos too, so probably it's not my best work either. Anyways, I was going to talk about PC Building Simulator. I'm still going through career mode. It is simulating a real world job, and it does have that entire problem of when you are somewhat accurately simulating a real world job, the game is never going to be 100% fun, and that is definitely true. I am really playing on the fantasy of running a PC shop with the caveat of trying to be most ethical PC shop around there possible, which in particular makes it kind of hard to make money. What did this get released on? I do remember something called Indiana Jones and Puzzles. says Windows Mobile. It's not this game though. Yeah, I've never seen this game before in my life. But there was like a Indiana Jones game for Windows 3.1, I feel like. But it doesn't seem like mobile games. It's kind of easy to miss some of the games, like because the Emperor's Tomb and the Great Circle is the newest one, and then the Infernal Machine and Last Crusade. The Lost Kingdom for Commodore. And then you have Lost Puzzles. You might be thinking actually of a fan project. Yeah, I never saw this. This looks like an incredibly simplistic Windows Mobile game, which would have been probably the maximum you could really do with Windows Mobile. There are aspects, certainly, as far as PC building simulator, that still lack, and I'm not sure how well you could ever improve it, and that you just really aren't getting the physical feel of taking off side panels of computer cases, sliding them and not cutting yourself or bending them, because there is a lot of flimsy metal around computer cases. The computer cases they have, some of them are pretty weird, which is less likely to be some that you would encounter in the real world. And you're getting a lot of probably somewhat poor people asking you to just improve their computers and dust their computers. It is still very weird that you're just using canned air to dust the computers in your workshop, instead of dusting it outside and keeping the dust outside. But yeah, it is. Some things are focused on, some things are not. Like basically most of your jobs where you're upgrading something are using 2018 technology, so they'll ask you to get a certain score in 3D Mark's Time Spy test, and the solution almost always is to just add a second graphics card and put it in either Crossfire or SLI mode to get more performance. But the problem with Crossfire and SLI, which I'm glad they really abandoned those concepts, is it gives you the impression that you can just put a new card in, when many motherboards didn't actually support Crossfire or SLI, or only supported one versus the other, and only NVIDIA graphics cards used SLI, and only AMD or ATI used Crossfire. But yeah, the idea gave you less than double performance boosts and completely ignored the thought that you would have to potentially upgrade your CPU speed to be balanced within graphics card, which that's still a problem even today, is that there is definitely an implication that you can have a Intel Core i3 CPU and then have a 5070, 5060 graphics card in your computer, and that you're going to have a good time that way, and it's just not the case. Or you're going to have a very cheap motherboard that can't even really run RAM at fast enough speeds, so levels are just going to take forever, even if it can render frames very fast. And you definitely just want everything to be more balanced. So you have to have a good motherboard that can handle your CPU and your RAM speeds. And you have to have a CPU that also can handle RAM speeds, because there's effectively going to be a maximum speed that a cheap i3 can run RAM at compared to an i9 Intel processor. And I'm saying Intel just because the numbers are easy to recognize, when really more likely it's going to be a Ryzen chip. And if you're going to overclock, which you really have to get to like level 9 or so before you can overclock CPUs in PC Building Simulator, and I haven't done it once. But if you are going to overclock, then you probably need a overclock version of certain CPUs, and it would be kind of crazy to try and overclock an i3 unless you're just absolutely trying to break it and get rid of it, which honestly, overclocking it won't break it in modern times, because they have like thermal throttling built into more modern CPUs, so they know for a fact that it's going too fast and will just start slowing down. But yeah, case fans and airflow are no consideration in PC Building Simulator, so you can buy case fans. I bought a couple of the different sizes, 90mm, 120, 140 millimeters are available, and I have yet to run into a situation where anybody has said my case fan is broken or I'd like another case fan. In most cases, computers come in and they are missing at least one case fan that could be added to the case, which is probably pretty typical, that you'd buy a case and you'd have maybe 2 case fans, but you'd have spots for 3, 4, 5 more. A lot of people now that all-in-one water cooling has unlocked want all-in-one water cooling for reasons that are probably not necessary, since I'm not overclocking their CPUs. And yeah, there's definitely at least one case I saw that was designed to be done in a very weird way, where it was rotated 180 degrees as far as the orientation of the motherboard and CPU, so the fans on your GPU in particular were trying to suck air downward from the top when they're designed to suck air upward from the bottom. And I don't even think that follows an ATX standard of any kind. I think you can have ATX motherboards lying down on their side, which is done very rarely as far as cases are now, and more often than not they're lying vertically in a tower with the GPU below the CPU orientation. But there's a lot of cases also that flip everything around in weird ways, where the GPU is below the CPU, and that you get these like right-handed computer towers. There's a lot of things in PC Building Simulator where that people want different cable mods to change the colors, which is all the cable modding you're really doing there, which I think is just vanity, and I just don't really care about what the inside of a computer looks like, nor do I build computers to even have a side panel to see that. I would definitely recommend not having a side panel. What is this? Oh, there's like a blackness here in this thumbnail, and it looked so black that I thought there was just an insect on my monitor. But yeah, I would definitely recommend having no glass panels, so you don't have to worry about the glass ever potentially breaking, and because many side metal panels might have another room for another fan, even if you don't need it. Plus it will reduce audio probably a little bit more by having metal, although maybe not. But yeah, I definitely, the cases I have bought for the last 2 computers that I wanted to build, I have one still to build, have been specifically designed to be sound dampening in particular, and so they definitely don't have any side panels and no visual aspects at all. So yeah, we are now at August 4th, so I'm guessing we are going to be a month behind as far as the revenue estimated charts for mobile games. Pokemon TCG Pocket is still doing its thing. I imagine by next month Musumi, or however you pronounce that, is probably going to be in maybe the 4th spot. Might be a little tough to beat out Genshin Impact, and probably is impossible to beat out Love and Deep Space, but who knows. If it made it all the way to the 1st spot, there is a possibility there. Still playing Memento Mori. They've got a little event going on right now, which, because I lucked out and got to the new character really on my first 5 pulls, I can now spend the rest of the time of this event to try and expand some other things about my teams and use gems for other things, and or save up gems for the next characters to unlock. I'm hitting a late stage on my 2 accounts for Memento Mori, where it is going to be more about getting multiple copies of some of the more limited characters than it is going to be about just getting 1 copy of everything. We can see Memento Mori is up 6 spots from last month, and I almost have absolutely nothing to say about Magic Emotica. Yes, I'm still doing the dailies, but that is about it. And if anything, I am dropping the ball just because I'm sleeping at the wrong time to actually do all the dailies of all 3 games consistently. I think I may have missed some days in Memento Mori, which is the one game I don't want to miss any progress with. I've been playing around with my smart meter at my house and found out that yesterday I somehow managed to spend 54 kilowatts, which sounds like a really large amount, and would, I have to assume, either be one of 2 things. Either my air conditioner is really sucking down the power, or my computer is really sucking down the power, which I should probably start to think about letting my computer just go to sleep more and see how that goes. And I'm going to change just one thing. Or the other possibility is I have a shed that has power running to it, and so maybe somebody was tapping power off the shed. So I went back in the shed and turned off all the circuit breakers, and we'll see if that changes anything. I don't think that's really happening, although it has happened to me before where somebody was literally stealing electricity from my house. But I mean, it probably does happen more than people think. But I would lean towards thinking it's my air conditioner. But I have like an Ecobee thermostat. I done all kinds of tweaking. I've set the temperatures higher. It is very hot right now in summer where I live, but yeah, it's not a good, not good conservative savings of energy that I would like. And we may just be a month back on hardware information too, which honestly, month to month, I think the hardware information is only really worth glancing at for a brief second and then moving on. And honestly, I don't think this is even worth looking at anymore. And so it's just a matter of me not spending the time to give up on maintaining this. This didn't even go a year as far as trying to get a long-term concept of what games are playing, and I don't feel like the information really tells me anything. I'm getting more information just by listening to people being excited around Battlefield 6. which it does seem like there's a lot of hype around Battlefield 6, which, yeah, I don't play mainstream games per se, so that's not really going to be for me. As far as PC Building Simulator goes, the last achievement I got was buying the storage cabinet, which did not turn out to be the thing I had hoped it would have been. Storage cabinet just gives you like more room to have computers pre-built, ready to go before you get a job, because there is kind of a limitation on the number of jobs you'll get in a day and the number of jobs you can take. It's probably about 8. So when you get late in the game and you want like $10,000, you're going to have to grind for probably a month to get there, because you're just not able to take as many jobs. But there's no time limit, so theoretically, if the jobs kept coming, you could take 20 or 30 jobs. In fact, the only real limiting factor in career mode that makes it a video game is the fact that you have only $1,000 over the overdraft protection. Otherwise, you could take an infinite number of jobs on day 1 and use an infinite overdraft protection or credit limit. Really, it should be a business credit limit, to buy all the components to replace, repair, and sell the computers. Nobody has screwed me and not paid on any of the jobs, which is unrealistic to the reality of the situation. But yeah, I'm like 15 hours into it, and still, the more I get into it, the more I'm enjoying it. What I'm not enjoying, unfortunately, is that I am going to prematurely have to take a bit of a bathroom break. So, yeah, we will look at the front page of Steam and do all of that after this break. Be back in a few minutes. Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. And honestly, I may end up having to take another bathroom break fairly quickly. Um, but yeah, we'll leave it at that for now. Yeah. There's something I thought about that I was going to say about PC Building Simulator, but I think I've forgotten it in the whole process. Yeah, overall in career mode, I'm still enjoying it, and yeah, eventually I will work my way into the idea of actually building a new PC. Hopefully, I'll get that done before Windows 11 is mandated or Windows 10 loses support. There is. I tried some of the different workshops in PC Building Simulator. Let's see how Tales of the Shire is getting reviewed. And of the default workshops that you get through the main game and the IT expansion, I've yet to find one that actually improves the situation, because what they effectively do is they move your computer workstations further away from each other, so you're just walking longer as you move between job and job. And it is weird because like the process of installing an operating system or scanning for viruses barely takes any time at all. They've sped it up and gamified it quite a bit, unrealistically, but for the better, definitely. I think this game Heartworm is actually doing very well too. And as such, there's just not a lot of times, unless you're running a 3D Mark test, that you can jump from one job to the other, where in the real world probably would have maybe 5 workstations and 1 shop helper, and then work your way around on different projects quite a bit. They also don't do a really great job of binning things. So when you remove a component from a computer, it's always put at the very end of the list of the components in that category in your inventory. But they only put a post-it note on components that are taken out that weren't supposed to be taken out, or at least were supposed to be put back in for specific computers. So if somebody says, upgrade my GPU, and you take out the GPU, it's no longer considered the property of the clients for some weird reason, which the whole game does do this a lot, where you're just taking their property. And I'd really like to see some kind of contract that says, hey, when I take something out of your computer, it becomes mine, so I can sell it used, or reuse it. Whereas the most ethical thing to do would be to either negotiate that up front or hand them their old GPU and say, here's your old GPU back when you put in a new one, and the motherboard really isn't going to support, or the power supply isn't going to support having both plugged in at the same time. Which, yeah, you probably could have 2 graphics cards plugged in at the same time in some computers that were completely different brands, one ATI or AMD and one NVIDIA, but you'd have to question the power supply, and you'd have to question, are they going to accidentally plug in to the HDMI of the wrong graphics card? Yeah, and that was the thing I was going to say, and now that I now remember. So the computer cabinet that you can unlock fairly early just lets you hold extra computer cases and entire computer builds, and so it's just a special inventory for the sum of parts, whereas your inventory is the individualized parts, not connected. What I really had wanted the computer cabinet to be is actually PC Bay, which is effectively an eBay parody. And that's when you can actually take a bunch of used parts, put them all together to make a working computer, and sell that working computer at auction. So that doesn't unlock until a lot later in PC Building Simulator, and kind of wish that would have unlocked earlier, because you end up with a lot of extra components after the first month or so, replacing people's graphics cards, because you don't have motherboards that even support Crossfire for the beginning of the career mode. So you can't put two graphics cards together and double performance. You would have to remove one underpowered graphics card and replace it with a better graphics card to get to the 3D Mark scores. It is also worth pointing out that the music has apparently caught me several Content ID claims, even though I have the music incredibly low. So next time I start playing it, oh, by the way, they have options turning this Mortuary Assistant game into, I believe, a movie. I think maybe Amazon Prime is doing it, but I know somebody is. There's a sequel to this game from the developers of this game too, which might explain why it's popping up in the algorithm being recommended to me. I listened to a podcast of two game content creators. Well, one is a game content creator who was at Giant Bomb in the old days, at least, and I guess he's part of Second Winds now still. And he said he specifically did not set the settings on Steam to censor out any adult content or even have an algorithm recommend games, and so he's just looking at the front page to be as informed as possible, which even I haven't really turned the algorithm off. If there is a way to turn the algorithm off, I think you'd have to open this in a private tab, which, yeah. Let's see, if I was to copy this, then new private tab, and then go to Steam, we can kind of show the difference as far as what's available, and these top bars are likely not going to be very different at all, because there's more of an algorithmic, and the sales are obviously not going to be different. Yeah. So yeah, later into the game of PC Building Simulator, I think is when you're going to start to hear the hit the point where you are just excuse me, you're gonna hit the point where you have enough money in cash to start building computers and just buying entire computer builds, to then immediately turn it around and hopefully sell it for a profit on PC Bay. And yeah, that's about the only way you're going to start jumping up to having an extra $5,000 sitting around in career mode, because you just aren't going to get there doing the jobs. And if you want to get the achievement for getting 5-star quality rating for your shop, you have to do absolutely everything perfectly for at least 25 jobs, which is probably a couple months straight of not making even a slight mistake. Although the game's not particularly that tricky as far as mistakes go. And you can see in private mode, the infinite scroll down here for recommendations is not even there. So it really isn't too much different. The biggest difference would be that unlogged in, I guess, you probably aren't being shown any adult content. at all. So the other person on the podcast does have that kind of censorship turned on for his own recommendation and front page. But I mean, he's really more of a game developer or in his past and not really anything as far as related to games nowadays. I mean, other than he is also working at PC World, so he's probably building or talking about computer hardware as it relates to games. Yeah, mortuary assistant. Rated very positively, already on my watch list. We'll put the check mark on here. Drifter, overwhelmingly positive, and I guess I can add that to my wish list. Of course, playing a game like PC Building Simulator and putting 13 plus hours into it at this point is just another way of not having time to do a game like this, which this would be a tough sell for me because I basically would want to play Alone in the Dark and then play this after that, and the struggle of getting through Alone in the Dark alone might be a issue, because obviously this is inspired in part with Alone in the Dark, which then went on to inspire Resident Evil 1 before the Resident Evil series started to evolve into its own thing. Tales of the Shire is at 78% positivity still, so it's not doing terrible, although the 24-hour peak of players was only 4,000 players. I guess it doesn't really matter though, because it's a single player game anyways. And then Night Dive Studios, 20% off System Shock 2 probably remake. Is this the new player? I don't know if this player is the new player. It doesn't kind of feel like it is. So maybe they haven't implemented that. Thing remastered at $20.99. Maybe historically relevant. I'm not sure if this is the good Power Rangers game or the bad one. Looks like it's the bad one. Mortal Kombat Legacy Collection is coming soon. Bubsy, the Perfect Collection is coming soon. Turok games. Here. Turok 1, Turok 2, Turok 3. Price jumping up significantly for Turok 3 compared to Turok 1 and Turok 2. Yeah, I just don't think I'm going to randomly buy things when there isn't a sale, and honestly I'm not sure I'm even going to buy things when there is a sale. I'm wondering if how many of these adventure bundle games do I not own, I wonder. Yeah, I'm wondering if once it gets into the fall and winter, maybe my electricity bill will start dropping down quite a bit, and if that was the case, yeah, so I would be paying here $2.61 to own Bad Mojo Redux and Noctropolis, which I don't even know what that is, and Harvester, which two of these games I know have been played by Game Grumps recently. So there is a slight argument to doing that, but I don't think much of one. Mortal Kombat Legacy Collection does intrigue me as far as a new release of the original games with probably some extras. That would be what I would hope for in something like that, to celebrate the legacy of those games, for better or worse, that the legacy that they do have. There's rumors and speculation that The Steam Deck OLED briefly discussed, Valve briefly discussed with AMD doing a Zen 4 processor in the Steam Deck OLED, which would have made it a lot more powerful, but perhaps not the same level of power efficiency, and would have definitely separated the original LCD models from the OLED models drastically, at which point you would just be calling the Steam Deck OLED the Steam Deck 2, which runs on the Zen 2 process. The LCDs and the OLED run on Zen 2 style chips. We still haven't seen any refurbs available. Yeah, people still playing Peak on their Steam Deck, and I bet this week so far there hasn't been anything incredibly new to play. Well, I guess Tales of the Shire needs a guide and Ragebound. Prove me wrong on that one. Grounded 2 also proves me wrong. So actually it's been a pretty good week. Octopath Traveler 2 also being played. And Sifu is back on the list for some reason. And Grounded 1 makes sense that it would be back on the list if it ever was on the list before. It Takes Two being played on the Steam Deck. I guess that kind of starts to make sense too. If one person has a PC and is playing one copy of the game, and then It Takes Two gives you a free copy for another player, I could see how a Steam Deck would really play that way as your second screen option. Yeah. And yeah, we still aren't really at the point where I think you can run Party Deck as a software. That's still too experimental to try and run two instances of something like It's Take Two on a Steam Deck separately. Alright, let's go through the Video Games Chronicle articles. Let's see what news we've got. I have a first play, which still haven't done anything there. I'm probably going to run into a lot of pages that just had trouble loading. In part, one of my news sources implemented a new provider for cookies and tracking cookies and things like that. So we may see that pop up too. I haven't seen enough evidence to prove this to be true, but I did see one YouTuber claim that the custom map creator that is coming with Black Ops 6, I think it's, no, not Black Ops 6, it's Battlefield 6, different game, might be a specially custom skinned version of the Godot engine. Now, it is not the case that the main game is running in the Godot engine from what we can tell for Battlefield 6. So it just seems like they figured out some way for the Godot engine to make enough models and do enough scripted elements to make some kind of mod file that then will be processed by the actual game engine. Which, in fairness, that could help a lot of people gain familiarity with how the Godot engine works, and it could make a lot of games more open to the possibility of having level editors, where once that would have been too much work. Of course, that has nothing to do with Black Ops 6 Final Zombies map showcased ahead of the Season 5 launch, which I don't care about Black Ops 6 or Battlefield 6, so I will leave it at that. Obviously, though, Battlefield 6 and Black Ops 6 Season 5 are launching on the same day, probably trying to compete against each other for that specific audience of the military gamer bros fandom. Yeah. Which maybe there should be a better term than calling them gamer bros, but it's the term that I think people would recognize, even if it is somewhat insulting. Evercade is getting a 12 game Rare compilation. I assume games made by Rare, the company. Yeah. So these are all going to be ZX Spectrum and older style games. Battletoads for 8-bit console, and Conker's Pocket Tales for handheld, being really the only ones that seem like they're even slightly modern. And it's showing up for the Evercade, so that'd be hard to play for most people. Battlefield 6 open beta maps and modes, detailed trailer release. Preloading for the Battlefield 6 beta is now live too. Yeah. And yeah, again, I'm hearing a lot of enthusiasm around this. Around Battlefield 6. And so we probably will see people who are enthusiastic around Battlefield 6 move away from things like Helldivers or whatever game they are playing at the moment and just start playing Battlefield 6 for the next 6 months at least. So I still have this terrible cough that's just never going away. The legendary Nintendo composer Hip Tanaka says he would, quote, love to make another full game soundtrack if asked. The Metroid, Tetris, and Super Mario Land composer said he's getting back in the video game music industry after 20 years away. Which, obviously, if you're looking for work, you would always say you'd love to do it. If you haven't been working with Nintendo for 20 years, though, I would think there's very much a case where there probably was a reason or some slight that was taken by not working with Nintendo in that meantime. Although there is a new Nintendo president, so maybe they're open to bringing people back, but I would bet no, considering how Nintendo is mostly moving forward and getting rid of anybody who has been kind of a legacy voice actor, and for the most part, with the exception of Miyamoto, I imagine they are trying to bring in young fresh blood who they can exploit and pay less, instead of bringing in somebody old who will actually value their time and demand fair pay. And it's probably worth pointing out that the level of composition as far as music goes would be fairly different 20 years down the line for video games. So even if you did try to make new tracks, you'd probably have to work with some kind of assistant to bring them into modern times and not just end up making 8-bit music that will sound too much like already existing 8-bit music, or will just sound far too simplistic. And they mention this game, which I'm not sure if Tanaka has any involvement with this game or not. Moving on, Call of Duty workers at Raven secured their first union contract with Microsoft. Union contract includes guaranteed wage increase and measures to tackle crunch. One would assume a union contract would also guarantee layoff protections and the procedure for terminations, actual firing people for actual cause too. That's some of that is basic things that union contracts would have. It's also worth pointing out that all of the hotels are, well, no, all the casinos in Las Vegas are now unionized. Well, it seems like everybody in Vegas is also on the verge of going out of business and bankrupt. So it almost seems like the casinos probably stopped fighting the unionization efforts because it was a losing battle on one hand, but also because they could just have a lot of people go, well, look what happened to Las Vegas. They went bankrupt the second the casinos became unionized. Which the reality of the situation is most people are saying that Las Vegas is losing business and turning into a ghost town because of a lack of foreign tourists wanting to visit it and a lack of replacement local in United States tourists wanting to visit it, and just economic reasons. It's probably also temperature reasons. There's really no reason that Las Vegas should exist at all. It does not have a good source of water anywhere near it, and it does not have a temperate climate. It does not have good soil around it to grow food or anything. It doesn't have mines around it really to justify it being a boom town based on mining or oil or any kind of limited resource at all. It was literally just built in the middle of nowhere to be a gambling location, and it's lasted a long time being a gambling location, but now people are less interested in gambling. Yeah. So, yeah, that's not really a good way. The biggest thing you could do with Las Vegas is probably just have a whole bunch of solar panels and other energy generation around it, but then you still would need electrical grid wiring to support all of that energy being transported to other locations at a very high wattage, which that would all cost money to build out. And they've done a lot of that, but it definitely isn't going to be the case that all electricity is coming from sunny Las Vegas. If anything, it's still probably too hot in Las Vegas to have solar panels. The panels themselves get too hot, and then you get less efficiency. Things like that. So you could probably do better putting a giant nuclear generator dome in Las Vegas if you were going to sell power. Otherwise, I don't know what you actually do with it as a city. I imagine you're just going to see people move further and further away, hotels getting demolished as they start to crumble over decades if this trend continues. Of course, none of that has anything to do with video games, so let's move on. I'm rambling here, sorry. A Nintendo survey seeks feedback on the controversial game keycards, physical and digital purchases. Nintendo is gauging player opinion on Switch 2 game purchasing options. I half wonder if maybe the survey is really also just to somewhat distract from the fact that they just announced price increases for all the Switch 1 hardware. Although in fairness, why would you be buying a Switch 1 brand new? But even the used market, you may see the price go up too. But yeah, I think gamers in general are not happy with the idea of game key cards, which in the long run is just going to drag out to the idea of having cartridges for longer than it really should, which is going to keep the prices of games artificially higher, or at least be an excuse to keep the prices of games artificially higher, when the reality of the situation is that games really should be handed to you on a micro SD card or just downloaded to a micro SD card or a hard drive inside of the Switch 2. EA is pretty motivated, quote unquote, to adapt Apex Legends for film and TV following the Sims movie. EA could bring Apex Legends to life through linear media. Sims movie? I haven't heard anything about a Sims movie. Yeah. I don't even know what a Sims movie really could be. It feels like that would be like a comedy thing where you're inside a game of Sims and being controlled by somebody else, and you have to try and escape the game of Sims. That's about all I could think, is that it would be something like a Truman Show type movie, with more comedy in it and less drama. Every game company, I think, is very motivated to turn everything into film and TV, because I think that just is free money to them. Effectively, they're just getting a licensing fee, and then it's up to the production company of the film or TV project to actually produce anything, and it doesn't really hurt the game if they make a terrible Sims movie or Apex Legends movie. I don't know anything about Apex Legends specifically, so I have no idea if there really is a story at all, or what that story would be to convert that into a film or TV project. But yeah, from the gameplay that I do recall from seeing from Apex Legends, it would be kind of an action movie as best as I could guess. Let's see. Starfield is reportedly targeting PS5 release in 2026 following, quote, weak sales of the first expansion. Bethesda's sci-fi RPG is coming to the PS5, but not in 2025, it's been claimed. One would have thought that they were going to do that anyways. And yeah, Starfield overall has very much just been a disappointment, although I don't know what people were really even expecting, in that it's a sci-fi space game trying to play a lot like Skyrim, which effectively probably does play a lot like Skyrim, which is the problem. It's just as buggy and janky and even more boring than Skyrim in the Elder Scrolls series. Yeah. Bethesda inherently is stretched way too thin and needs to focus exclusively on the next Elder Scrolls game, and probably hand off the Fallout series to somebody, possibly the original creators, and say, write us at the very least what the story should do, and go forward in that direction. And then they should have never been so crazy ambitious to try a sci-fi space game, because their engine is not that good that they're using. They need to shift to a new engine completely, and their team is just really developed in a way that is designed to not turn out games fast enough. It would be a very different situation if Bethesda just churned out Elder Scrolls every 2 years or so, and then they were buggy and janky, but alright. But when you have 10-year, 25-year potential breaks between games, and you just have that major development hell element, there is a real problem. Oh yeah, speaking of real problems, I found a YouTube video that's going through all of the design Bible that was designed for a potential third American McGee Alice game in the series called Alice Asylum. And yeah, I definitely followed that whole drama. It was kind of during a lockdown period. American McGee lives in China. He at one time had a computer game company called Spicy Horse in China that really got shut down, and now his wife has these dreadful plushies, I think is the name of her company, which makes a bunch of dolls. And so he would stream, American McGee and one other person who was working with him would stream them playing the original Alice game and Madness Return, the sequel, while talking and promoting about the thought of a third game and making this design Bible, which eventually became a Kickstarter, so he got a lot of funding for this design Bible to then eventually pitch it to EA to hopefully get it made into a game. He also talked about having a company make a Wizard of Oz game that would have completely not included EA, and so he would have been able to make another game that way. Meanwhile, he was also promoting heavily the dreadful plushies that his wife was selling, and in retrospect, in particular, and even at the time, it's either two things I think you can make an assumption for. Either American McGee, which is a crazy name to name yourself and then move to China and marry a Chinese woman and have Chinese kids, either is crazy to an extreme extent. I know he's a little crazy. I think even he would admit that he thought EA would ever actually greenlight a third Alice game when they have just been sitting on the two games they already own the rights to, and they haven't been making any kind of single player platforming game in a very long time. EA has just been making sports and making massive amounts of money. So yeah, either you have to assume he was way crazier than you would think to think that would ever go through, or you have to assume he was crazy like a fox, which I have a tendency to think he might have been just crazy like a fox, stringing along people who would desperately have wanted that third game, having a Kickstarter, getting people to fund the Kickstarter, while selling plushy dreadfuls, and fully knowing throughout the whole point, or at least should have been knowing, that there was no way EA was going to make that game. And so, yeah, now that has all happened and EA did not want to make the game, which, yeah, pretty obviously they wouldn't, and them having no other avenue, once the pitch was rejected, talk of the Wizard of Oz game disappeared, and all talk, really, of trying to make anything in his Alice series disappeared, and he disappeared for the most part. He still has a YouTube, and every now and then will put up something that is more family videos, if anything, but I mean, he really just disappeared. And again, maybe he is not crazy like a fox, just crazy, and so maybe he was just very depressed. But either way, it's pretty insane to do all of that public and just streaming and talk about the idea of pitching a game in public and getting people's hopes up when games get pitched all the time. And so far, in watching this very long video that's just going through all of the design bible, which really is way too pretty and way too detailed for what it needed to be, and maybe they wasted a bunch of work on that too. So far in the pitch, there is really nothing that screams we're going to have microtransactions or we're going to have any way of monetizing this other than a single initial sale, which, as sleazy as it may sound, you basically need to make a pitch for a game that says there's an opportunity for microtransactions here, here's DLC we can sell here, here's how we're going to monetize, here's how we're going to make a bunch of games. But yeah, the whole thing is probably even crazier than like Yandere Simulators drama, where there you just have an independent person making a somewhat controversial game and then taking forever and never really finishing it, even to this day not having finished it, and just constantly adding feature creep in it, constantly trying to add new things and refusing any help offered to him, and just not a good manager of his own time and a good manager of the concept there. At the very least, what makes it worse for American McGee is that he has two games he actually made. He ran companies, so he should know how to do things better. But on the other hand, he kind of doesn't too, because it's probably been 10 to 15 years since Madness Returns comes out. So his leadership skills may very well just be out of date. But yeah, it is interesting certainly to see the whole design bible out there as what they wanted to do. but it is also worth pointing out that the American McGee Alice series is very much out there, and if anything, by being its own unique story, not licensing anything else, it potentially goes in even darker directions than, say, the new Hellraiser game might go, although we'll see. But yeah, it would be interesting to see if this wave of censorship started hitting certain games that are more AAA published games, like Madness Returns, but I bet it doesn't. I bet it does not, because I bet EA has special contracts that are different with Steam, and Steam would fight harder against that. But yeah, it's such a long video that I'm watching it. I've started it twice and only made a small amount of progress. Otherwise, I'm also running out of things on YouTube to watch, which definitely tells me I'm watching way too much YouTube. It does kind of feel like it's been a somewhat slow weekend for content creators. Moving on, Video Games Chronicle says, as Rare celebrates its 40th anniversary, a licensed Xbox controller has been listed early on Amazon. It appears to be a third-party 8BitDo controller. Interesting that it's an 8BitDo third-party controller, or it looks like it, when every other special Xbox skin has always been done, I think, in-house as far as the manufacturers of Xbox controllers. Well, this almost certainly, I think, gets too close to rumors and speculation, and even if it is an official Xbox controller skin, they do that all the time. Numerous first-party Xbox controllers have been released over the years. Rare is yet another company that's been swallowed by Microsoft, and probably would do better if it was alone as a separate company. Tekken 8's final Season 2 DLC character is, how would you pronounce that? Mayari-Zo? A brand new character from Madagascar. She'll be the last Season 2 character following the release of Armor King in October. Excuse me again for coughing. I'm not sure if it was Tekken, but one of these fighting games has been introducing more international female attractive characters. I feel like there was another one from Africa that was introduced. Which inherently, I guess if you think about it, fighting games originally did have, like, here's the Russian guy from Russia, here's the American guy from America, and so you'd have this really small simplified map of different regions with each character who is perhaps archetypal, maybe stereotypical of that region. But nowadays you can see how you could expand the map to include more neglected regions. And since this is Bandai Namco, maybe this is an example of where the Japanese are just becoming more interested / aware of more neglected second world countries, or just more neglected third world countries, first world countries. This trailer is all about Armor King, which is some guy who either has a wolf for a head or is wearing a wolf head. Definitely feels fairly silly. Yeah. So this is all about Armor King. So I'm guessing that this is at the end teased as far as our new character goes. So it seems like she's possibly wearing some traditional outfits and weights. She's speaking in, I assume, whatever language is spoken in Madagascar, and that's it. So you've got a new location and new character. And yeah, you can definitely see she's showing off that two-piece bikini style outfit. Let's see. I think Evo is either close or is happening, and that's why we're getting a lot of these fighting game announcements. But I don't follow it well enough to know for sure. Sega has shared the first combat gameplay for its upcoming Virtual Fighter project. The game is in the works at Like a Dragon developer Rugai Gotoku Studios. And see, this almost looks like this would be live action footage being filmed, but it isn't. So, got a minute here. Let's see what this looks like. You constantly, with a fighting game, have to kind of justify why are you making a new game, or what are you changing to make people want to try something different, or feel like there's been a major improvement, particularly in the fighting game industry, because I think you're just going to have people want to play the same game over and over again and just continuously practice and get better and better at it at a tournament level. This game is weird in that it seems to have a time slowdown aspect when you're doing certain attacks, which I don't know how you do that in 2-player and make it fair. It definitely seems like it even has kind of a knockout fatality equivalent in it. Definitely not going anywhere as extreme as fatalities may go in nowadays. Which, honestly, I think fatalities nowadays in Mortal Kombat are probably more ludicrous than extreme. Here's a quote: "I don't think it needs Nicki Minaj." Battlefield 6 designer says its skins will be grounded. Call of Duty has a wide variety of crossover skins. So, they are saying Battlefield is going to be the more serious skin seller, still trying to monetize and sell skins. Which, again, that third American McGee's Alice game very possibly could have been picked up if they could convince EA they were going to sell a ton of skins around it. You know, what is it? Infinite Nikke as a game plays pretty similar to the way Alice Madness Returns plays. It's just not as darkly themed in its stories and visuals. So you could potentially take something like Infinite Nikke and have a monetization of gacha pools of outfits for Alice, and maybe that would have worked. It probably wouldn't have, but it would have been something to at least pitch in the design document and then hope it gets dropped in the process of actually developing a game. Apparently Call of Duty also had Jay and Silent Bob, which I don't think those are particularly great representations of either one of them. I don't hate this Nicki Minaj outfit skin anyways. Pink gun, pink hair, not ridiculously exhaustively big outfits that she seems to be wearing. Certainly would lead to people more people seeing you when you may be trying to hide. Okay, so we haven't heard anything in a long time from BioShock 4's development from 2K, which, by the way, also we really haven't seen anything from 2K as far as single player games, and I guess Borderlands 4 will technically be a 2K game that gets released fairly quickly here. We also have not heard anything from the game Judas, made by the person who is mostly attributed to being the creator of BioShock 1, and also though deserves some of the blame for the bad parts and the credit for the good parts of BioShock Infinite. But yeah, BioShock 4's leadership has been replaced by 2K, as they insist they're committed to delivering a great game, which is a statement I would like to hear a lot more often. This is not your typical case where middle management is possibly protecting lower management, or upper management is protecting middle and lower management. They have gotten rid of the leadership. Now, this probably comes a lot more down to personality conflicts than anything else. Developer Cloud Chamber has changed its director and studio head. That's 2 people. Maybe there's going to be some bigger controversy around this, but we shall see as time goes on, I guess, if there is a bigger controversy. My real fear, though, is that the director and studio head, assuming those are even 2 people, not just the same person, gets replaced by somebody that we really wouldn't want in charge. I'm trying to remember his name. Randy Pitchford. That would be the ultimate "we are doomed" flag. If Randy Pitchford all of a sudden is now a director and studio head at a different developer owned by 2K, instead of being, I think, really just in charge of films of Borderlands, with which there are no more films of Borderlands that are going to be made. Maybe Randy Pitchford has somehow wiggled his way back into being in charge of Gearbox in Frisco, Texas, but one would hope that's not the case. So the spokesperson has confirmed Cloud Chamber studio head Kelly Gilmore has left their role. I assume Kelly is a female, but maybe not. Yeah, this might be more of a boys club thing, with the creator-director Hogarth de la Plante having been moved to a publishing position, which, maybe there's more controversy around this, maybe not. At the very least, we're not seeing Randy Pitchford being moved in yet. According to Bloomberg, the leadership changes following a recent failed review by executives at 2K Games, the publisher of Take-Two. BioShock 4's narrative was identified as an area that was particularly in need of improvement and will be revamped. According to Bloomberg's sources, which they say Bloomberg's sources, but it really is just one guy's sources at Bloomberg. 2K also canceled plans for a remake of the original BioShock game earlier this year. Which, do we right now need a full-on remake of BioShock 1 when the remasters run fairly well, and that is just kind of the experience you would want? Sure, there is a terrible boss battle at the end of BioShock 1, but tweaking it, changing it even a little bit just seems like it's unnecessary. And unless you can come out with Bioshock 4 and that's just amazing, and then you realize that Bioshock 4 is running on an engine that would make Bioshock 1 remake make a lot of sense, I think you just leave that for at least another 5 years, if not 10, before you start to think about doing a remake and going in circles like that. Meanwhile, also you need to see how sales compare to Judas, if Judas ever comes out. Yeah. Inherently, the Shock series, games inspired by System Shock, really only have like 2 good games in each individual series before it jumps to somebody else taking that concept and putting it in a different world and doing something different. And the Bioshock series in particular may very well still have that same problem, where maybe it is time, even in Bioshock 4, to stop being so obsessed with either Rapture or Columbia and the idea of a lighthouse and the idea of worlds focused exclusively on one ideology, whether it's capitalism or communism or theocracy, totalitarianism, I guess is what you would call Bioshock Infinite. We don't seem to have a name for the new team, and this is the first time I've actually scrolled down to read an entire article in a long time. I was looking for names of the new people, and apparently the names of the new people aren't here. So far as the way it's depicted, though, until there's some real controversy that gets pitched, it does seem fairly on the up and up. An internal review was done. They were not satisfied with the level of quality of Bioshock 4. They replaced the heads of management to take it in a different direction. On the other hand, the exact same thing could be said with a completely different intention to have new management come in and lay off everybody and cancel the project. Which that often happens too, is that upper management will go to lower management and say, we need you to lay off everybody. They said, heck no, we're not doing that. And then they say, fine, you're fired. We'll replace you with somebody else who will come in and do that. That too happens. Moving on to the Gematsu articles now. Danmaku 4 Unlimited 4 Wyvern Ultra has been announced for PC. Did you recognize the word Danmaku? And it definitely seems like it's a mech game of sorts. I guess it's more of a shoot 'em up game. I'll leave it at that. Lyrical Media establishes an independent games publisher called Lyrical Games, including a new game from Blackbird Interactive. There are 3 titles currently in production. The question here is, what is Lyrical Media? I don't recognize it as a company, so I assume we'll get real game announcements later that will make more sense. Stick It to the Stickman launches in early access on August 18th. I assume this is a Stickman game that is available on Steam. Hyperdimension Neptunia Rebirth 3 V Generation for Switch launches this fall in Asia with English language support. Very possibly not ever going to be actually released in the West, though. And certainly, when we start to think of the level of censorship here that's happening, are we going to find that the Neptunia series gets eventually just pressured out of existence? This looks like this is a rhythm game, which is not really what I was expecting for the Neptunia series. Yeah, they're definitely playing a lot of music. right now. No, it's not a music game. It's just that watching an opening movie is depicting it very much like the opening of an anime with music behind it. Yeah, this is going to be a JRPG. We don't need to watch the entire thing. Yeah. We can see what the actual gameplay looks like instead. Which, yes, it still feels like it is going a little bit simplistic as far as JRPGs go. And I guess maybe we're hitting a point now where there might be a fairly large separation between these kinds of JRPG games and things like Clair Obscur. You may see that there's more of a Western audience who is interested in playing something like Clair Obscur and having those JRPGs, and isn't interested or even particularly happy to play a more anime style JRPG art style game. So maybe the grind is not really a big problem for a lot of those gamers. It probably isn't, but maybe the visuals are, which will potentially segment the niches, and one would hope it might grow the audience a little bit, but it may very well not. And I definitely hope it doesn't shrink the audience and then all of a sudden we just see a lot of clones of Clair Obscur and almost no Neptunia style JRPGs, which in fairness, the Neptunia style JRPGs have not all been, more often than not, they've been pretty bad anyways. Moving on, Adventure in Samsara launches September 4th. It's a Metroidvania side-scrolling action-adventure game. There's a game that's a Metroidvania game called Primal Planet that has you playing as a caveman and dealing with dinosaurs for the most part. And apparently that's getting pretty good reception. So again, if money was no object and I had enough time, I could see myself playing Primal Planet. Like right now in particular, I'm feeling like there's 3 or 4 games I'd like to play all at the same time, and there's just not enough me's going around to be able to play all those games at the same time. Which in reality I could really only play one game at a time. Atelier Ryza Secret Trilogy Deluxe Pack launches November 13th. New story elements and playable characters detailed. So if you haven't bought the series and were thinking maybe you would want to buy the series, this probably is the better way to play it, but you might want to wait until reviews happen anyways, just to see if it changes something. We've seen in some cases where the re-release, the bundled release, the deluxe version release of JRPGs all of a sudden tweak the grind and make it even easier, take less time, which certainly I would appreciate that, but they probably don't tweak the grind anywhere as much as I would like it to be tweaked. You see, this may not be I think this is the 3 main games. Yeah, it's the 3 main games. For a second there I thought there might be 3 spin-off games, but I don't think there is. Sakuna Hinuka Junreitan has been announced for PC, iOS, and Android. I'm not sure what it is. It's some kind of JRPG, but it seems like it probably is going to be mobile first. UK's going to acquire Aqua Plus. We've been seeing a lot of Um, a lot of movements and maneuverings lately between Japanese companies. So UK is going to acquire Utawa Ray Rumono and Two Heart developer Aqua Plus. Yeah. So 783 million yen deal. Estimated price. Broken Lore's game Don't Watch for PS4 and 5 and Xbox One and Series launches August 18th. It's currently available on PC. So we can see how well reviewed this is. See ya. Inherently, with all the games I'd want to play, here's another one I might have wanted to play. Although you could probably put any kind of horror game like this on low priority. It is just going to become more and more of a case of needing to do the whole giant bomb thing where you just have an executive producer assigning games to specific people, and then maybe those people will convince you to go back and play those games, but you still really wouldn't have time to play all the games you want. Yeah. If I had 3 genie wishes, the ability to stop myself from aging and getting sick, and just having infinite time and having infinite money to stop myself from starving, that's probably more than one wish there, but that's what I would want, is just give me more time, give me more energy, let me experience all the world has to offer instead of the tiny fraction any one human can experience in their lifespan, or all the good the world has to offer. I'm fine with skipping all the bad, but yeah, I don't know how you really manage that otherwise. So what the danger is that you start to get a bunch of games and you want to play a bunch of them, and then you just get very ADHD with them. You play the games for like 3 hours and then you stop playing them and don't make it to the credits, which means you really probably didn't experience all there was worth to experience. Anyways, moving on, Street Fighter 6 character DLC character C Viper has a teaser trailer. They've gone with a screenshot here showing a decent amount of side boob, and that seems like that is what they're highlighting. Yeah, it was Street Fighter that introduced this African character, and boy is that glowy shiny. That's one of the things about PC Building Simulator too, is that when you actually get in the case, I would like to see the components more glowing and shining, or the idea of just there being a lamp on your head to see components, or a light behind you to see components, because some of the workshops can be very bright and nice looking, but when you're actually looking in the components, realistically they'd be in shadow, but kind of unrealistically you don't have a lamp above you. And yeah, you would more than likely have a lamp above you at a workstation. You should probably a magnifying lamp that has a magnifying lens on it, and also you would turn the computers so they're lying flat while you're working on it, which is also a thing you don't do in PC Building Simulator, which it does make me wonder if whoever made PC Building Simulator is missing some level of knowledge or just deep experience in building computers, which I feel like they probably are. I bet they built 4 or 5 computers, which is about as much as any individual person can do, unless they're taking a computer class and the computer class just has you building computers non-stop, or building fake computers with broken parts non-stop, which would be a good way to educate, frankly, is to say, take this computer apart and put it back together, and that way you're not really breaking any computers using fake parts or broken parts. But yeah, until you actually get into a computer shop And even if you were in a computer shop, you basically would have to be in like a computer shop in Shenzhen, not in the United States. You're just not going to get enough orders to build enough computers. Even some of those shops in Shenzhen is probably only building 3 computers a week at most. And if you were on a factory line assembling a computer for some OEM like Dell, that would be a completely different experience than running a computer shop. And inherently, trying to run a computer shop and make a business out of it is almost impossible unless you're in a very rich city where you can get enough business and there's no competition, or very little competition. Otherwise, a lot of people are still going to take things to Geek Squad or just buy new computers overall. You would have basically had to have started a computer shop before Circuit City and Best Buy even really started to do computers, by maybe a decade or two, established a really good reputation, had a bunch of contracts with local companies to fix and build their computers too, and then been able to survive the onslaught that was Circuit City and Geek Squad from Best Buy coming into towns and turning the idea of running a local computer shop into a farce of just a McDonald's franchise of computer repair. And even then, you wouldn't really have been accounting for the fact that the computers would have just become so disposable that people would stop trying to fix them. And that's not just computers, that's true with all electronics. Anyways, moving on. This week's Japanese game releases: Mafia the Old Country, Gradius Origins, and more. We have a long list here of games, I think all of which have Steam links, or most have Steam links. So, yeah. We'll see what opened up after this. Last 30 days for this Death Note game is 67%, and there's only 30 people online, and it's online PvP. I think at this point I should probably take that off the wish list. If I didn't say it before, I definitely should have. There was a real question as far as whether this Among Us clone with Death Note license in any way would get a big enough audience to maintain itself as it being only online player versus player. Yeah. And I think we've seen now, no, it didn't have that possibility. Endless Legend is not out yet. Endless Legend 2. Fate Hollow Astraxia Remastered. Apparently doesn't have a YouTube short made on it. Gradius, we've looked at before. House of the Dead 2 remake. Are all of these games coming out in the next week? I think some of them definitely are. So we haven't seen any new press releases from Mafia the Old Country in a while. So I can't help but wonder if Mafia the Old Country comes out to very little fanfare, and then very quickly we see 2K just shut down Hangar 13 and lay everybody off. I mean, that does unfortunately seem to be the default thing to happen when games get released nowadays. The best way, I guess, to prevent that is to hope that Mafia the Old Country actually didn't cost that much to make and does sell well enough. But honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if the decision to shutter Hangar 13 has already been made. And yeah, I've never played any of the Mafia series, so I don't have any particular love for it. Operation Night Strikers is a collection of laser gun games, or things that look like laser gun games from the old days. I definitely recognize a couple of them as being laser gun arcade games, although these might be the PC ported versions of those. Raven of the Ritual, or Ritual of the Raven. We've done 1,000 Deaths, not so much. Voyagers of Nira is coming soon in early access. So if those are all the new characters and new games coming out this week in Japan, a lot of those are things that are coming basically as a surprise to me. They haven't put out a lot of promotion. Komatsu also has Tekken 8 DLC character Armor King launching October 16th with a new fighter Mayari Zo launching this winter. They split the screenshot here this time. And yeah. Worth pointing out here though, it's probably not going to save Tekken 8. Overall, 53% positive. So there must be some real networking or control issues. In the last 30 days, 54% positive, so it really hasn't changed much either. The old 24-hour peak, as far as its player base, is only 7,500, and its all-time peak has only been about 50,000. So yeah, I think that is far too small of an audience for a game series as big as Tekken 8 should be, as far as just name recognition goes. Then Virtual Fighter, new project, combat gameplay. First look, we looked at that. Yeah, kind of a gory screenshot to pick. And then yet another fighting game, Fatal Fury City of Wolves DLC character Kin launches today. Okay. We will leave it at that. And a lot of these games are being tagged with something. I don't know what it is though. Nudity. They're being tagged with nudity. In this case, at least, they were tagged with nudity. But I severely question if that's true. Like, I severely question if there's even a joke. Somebody's nude behind a cover or a butt is shown. And inherently, I'm glad at least that Steam does not look at its own tags too deeply, because if they did, there would be a massive number of games that would potentially get delisted or put in the adult only section based on users frivolously using the wrong tags, or developers and publishers frivolously using the wrong tags. But yeah, I'm trying to think, was there ever a time where actual nudity happened in a mainstream fighting game? I mean, you had babe-aldies, but those were turning Mortal Kombat characters into babies, not showing babes. So not there. And at a certain point, I guess if you're ripping the skin off people, they're technically naked, but then it's not easily identifiable at that point. Yeah, I don't think we have anything like that. Now, definitely know that there have been a few fighting games that they probably are pretty old ones where there would be nudity in them, but they were basically adult games, and they're not anything recent or anything that anybody would have really played. And yeah, I've stopped looking at adult games on Steam, so I don't think I ever really saw a fighting game that had any nudity in it. There is a all-girl fighters fighting game that came out maybe 4 years ago, and I don't think there really was any nudity in that either. So yeah, I guess somebody would have to let me know if there actually was ever a fighting game recently, or what is the short list of fighting games that actually have nudity in it. And I guess your definition of nudity might be different in different people's beliefs, as far as is shirtlessness of a male presenting character or a hawk-headed character considered nudity. I would think for video games tagging purposes, no, it wouldn't say that, and definitely wouldn't say just bikini clad type fighters would be considered nudity. either. Moving on, Marvel Token Fighting Souls PS5 closed beta is set for September 5th to the 7th. Definitely feels like they are not going to be testing too much there, and instead this is just a weekend way of getting influencers to play their games and talk about it over the course of a weekend. We haven't seen anything new for Token Fighters, and I would have expected that it is actually much further away from a release time than it might be. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if this was a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now before this even comes out. Like, of course, maybe they have it ready to go and they're just waiting for Marvel Rivals to lose the last bit of its audience, or make sure there's no other Marvel games competing with them, or wait until there is something big happening around Marvel movies or Marvel comics, although something big happening around the comics wouldn't really affect sales much. Anyways, moving on to the Gaming on Linux articles, which it seems like today we may finally have had all of my macros run correctly, even though I changed absolutely nothing. The Drifter is easily my new favorite point-and-click adventure, according to Gaming on Linux. I just saw that game and already put it on the follow list. I have to reload the page to just... No, I skipped the follow list and immediately just put it on the wish list even. Moving on, Heroic Games Launcher version 2.18.1 brings more bug fixes for good old games and Epic Games on Linux via /SteamOS. SteamOS? Yeah. Continuously getting updates for several softwares. You can grab some friends and play some gaming in the Humble Co-op bundle, which... Let's see, what do they have listed here? Actually, it probably doesn't matter what they have listed because all of this is going to be linked to, I think, on Steam anyways. But, yeah, I don't think any of those games are particularly going to be my cup of tea. Spider Heck, I think, is one of them. And these are older games, so I'm not going to make a YouTube short on them. Moving Out. There's another one. Yeah. I don't know, maybe there's a thought here on that. Can I add that to my wish list? Yeah, I'm still thinking about games for the kid I gave a Steam Deck to. Also. Although, I'm not sure they would really want to play that game. Towerfall Ascension. Mostly, the kid is just gonna pick and choose games based on what his friends are talking about or what he's specifically interested in, and that is going to be an incredibly shorter list compared to me just adding things to my wish list and buying a bunch of games. So if I personally don't have any interest in it, I probably still wouldn't buy the game. And I may just be a bit cruel and make the kid pay for the game himself if he wants it. Rivals of Aether is on my wish list. This is, I think, trying to be kind of like a Smash Brothers clone, but then there's also Rivals of Aether 2, which drastically changes from 2D to 3D. Ember seems like it's a firefighting co-op game. Yeah. May give that a chance. I've never really found a firefighting game. Portal Knights. Seems like it would just be a Minecraft clone. Although having a Minecraft clone on Steam, particularly if it's Steam Deck compatible, which says it's playable on Steam Deck, might make some sense too, instead of jumping through a lot of hoops to play the actual Minecraft game. Unrailed was very popular in 2020, so definitely recognize people played it. May be pretty irrelevant to me nowadays. Then Fling the Finish. Yeah, there might be something there too. I'm being very generous today as far as just adding things to my wish list. Alright, next Gaming on Linux article says x86 on ARM64 emulator FEX gets some huge gaming improvements. I feel like I had heard this, maybe I didn't talk about it though. There are probably a couple of emulators being developed and improved upon to run your standard computer code, which would be x86 or maybe AMD 64 code in modern times, on a reduced instruction set chip that would be the ARM64 standard, which means it's an API converting the CPU functions and calls. He added an extra P here between the original apps and the new CPU, which almost certainly is going to lead to a loss of performance that can only be made up by having the apps run faster with a more powerful ARM64 chip. And it's questionable whether it really would save a lot of battery using an ARM64 chip if you are just emulating it to run x86 apps. But at least you're getting the apps to run, which is a big success to say the least. The blog post about big juicy just-in-time optimization. Just-in-time is literally the concept of the API converting the x86 code to ARM64 code just in time before it's needed. Which, yeah, you can see percentage of frames per second improvement for several games they've tested here versus the version 2508 versus 2507.1. 40 frames per second percentage improvement, or 40% improvement for Cyberpunk, over 20 for Stray, a little bit for God of War, over 20 for Doom 2016, over 20 for Grim Fandango Remastered, and under 20 for Teardown. Now what's interesting about this is that this game is being thrown in as a comparison, because this is a very old game, whereas everything else here is not that old. 2016, 2018. I think this may have been maybe in past 2018. This probably was slightly past 2018, and I don't know when Teardown was released, but this was released probably in the 90s. So there is a weirdness there. The bigger weirdness, though, also shows that in the case of Grim Fandango Remastered, which I guess would be a newer version of Grim Fandango, so I guess it is a newer release in the remastered version, you're still not seeing a significant improvement there. Which, yeah, that's weird. Although, also, when you see Grim Fandango Remastered and how it is just pulling the scale, they really should have not included this data point for how much it's pulling the scale up. That this game that's very old, that has a remastered version, is running above 250 frames per second, which leaves no accurate marker at all to tell you if Cyberpunk 2077 is running at 60 frames per second, now where it was running at 40 before, or if it is running still at like 45 frames per second. You can maybe estimate that this line here is 125 frames per second if you cut it in half. And then if that's half of the line, then about this line here would be 60 frames per second, which would put Stray and Teardown probably below 60 frames per second, and maybe God of War and Cyberpunk above it, and Doom above it. Which, yeah, this is a great example of having a bad chart and not showing enough information. But it is also an inspiring story to say, hey, things may run, and things may run well enough on an ARM64 chip, but I definitely don't think I could recommend anytime soon somebody buying an ARM64 handheld gaming device to try and play a bunch of Steam Windows games on it. Windows on ARM in general was a, as far as I can tell, completely failed project to try. I mean, I think they're still working on it, but so far I don't see any real success to try and sell laptops that might have better battery life because they're ARM, or might just be cheaper because they're ARM, but could still run Windows and run regular Windows software, which I'm not sure Windows on ARM has anything in it to actually run a just-in-time compiler type API to make Windows x86 applications run. I think Windows on ARM exclusively really is just trying to have you install ARM versions of software that's available, which there's considerably fewer apps that would have ARM versions. Moving on, NVIDIA beta driver 58.65.06 released for Linux with bug fixes and expanded Wayland support. It is also worth pointing out that I saw someone meme that kids in the UK can no longer use the GeForce Experience app because they would have to verify that they're over 13 to log in into the GeForce Experience app and have an account. It is worth pointing out, however, that while that probably is true, the GeForce Experience app has been mostly abandoned, if not completely deprecated, in favor of, I believe it's just called the GeForce app now, that does not require you to log in or have an account, and they don't even want you to log in or let you log in and have an account as far as I know, which it was stupid in the first place to have that be a thing. Just scrolling down here to highlight all of the fixes, but I'm not going to actually mention any of them and try to save some time there. Sacred 2 Remaster has been announced from THQ Nordic. THQ Nordic announced several things at their THQ Nordic Direct, or whatever it was actually called, and yeah, one of those was Darksiders 4 also. The question certainly is, will a modern audience be sold on a little bit of skin to play a remaster of a very old game that they very likely did not play originally? I vaguely recall a game called Sacred, but just because the word was sacred, I don't recall anybody actually talking about it or saying anything. Although in fairness, I guess it is worth pointing out that before the internet was a big thing, I had maybe 2 or 3 friends in school that would talk about or admit to playing games at all. And if there were any more gamers, they probably would have been like PlayStation gamers or PlayStation 1 gamers at most, maybe Nintendo 64 gamers. So something like Sacred would have not been something that would have even been discussed when I was younger, and frankly the timeline might not line up there much either. Sacred 2 may have originally released far after I was out of high school. But yeah, I was very slow to try to get on any forums or anything. And only fairly recently, in like the last few months, I've gotten onto a forum, a Discord forum, to start to follow what other people are talking about games. And Reddit inherently is not very helpful to know what people are talking about games anyways. Just because Reddit has its own problems. Moving on, Frostliner has announced recently is basically Snowpiercer as a survival city builder. Okay. Let's watch this trailer as I cough. Okay. So first of all, unlike Snowpiercer, it seems like you can expand your line of trains. Second of all, it looks like there's a gun on top of the Frostliner, so there's something other than just completely nothing but snow outside the tracks. And I think you're like picking up people. That's weird. Snowpiercer literally could not stop. That was part of the thing, is that Snowpiercer in the movie at least is a metaphor for capitalism, if anything, or maybe any economic system, in that it must always go forward, it must always progress, because if it ever stopped, the system would just completely fall apart. Or more literally, in the movie, if the Snowpiercer stopped, the wheels would freeze up and everybody inside of it would freeze to death. And that they were constantly chasing the summer hottest parts of Earth by moving forward to stay out of the winter zones when it would have been too cold to be livable. Plus, Snowpiercer was also collecting all the snow at the front and converting that snow into water, which one would assume it's probably expelling some waste product of water out the back too. It might have even been the case that Snowpiercer was collecting water and then splitting the water in some way to generate energy. So, while visually this looks the same, I severely question whether the themes and story would be the same. But I'm not sure it really matters either. And then I only watched the first TV season of the Snowpiercer TV season, and yeah, I thought it was relatively good. Maybe I even watched a second season, but yeah. There definitely was a short theme narrative that wanted to be said in the movie, where the TV seasons from TNT, I think, were probably having to say a lot more and stretch themselves out to try to get more renewed deals and trying to tell more of a story than what the allegory of the movie was trying to say. So I would definitely say the movie is for people to watch, to understand and try and understand on a deeper level as far as what it's saying as an allegory, and enjoy it on the surface level as having more kung fu fights in it than you would think, versus the TV series, which I think is more surface level. You're supposed to enjoy it as just a drama and take everything that's happening not as an allegory for anything else. Moving on, click through the joy of opening up mystery boxes in Unbox-a-thon. That sounds like that would feed very much into people's addictive personalities. Yeah. I definitely don't think this would be the kind of game I would want to play, but Heck, I'll make a YouTube short on it anyways. Dice a Million channels Balertro vibes into game-breaking dice rolling. This is the next Gaming on Linux article. Yep. Yeah, lots of games are going to be compared to Balertro going forward. Let's see. So then the next article I reloaded. Gyro through a collection of handcrafted mazes in the Steam Deck exclusive game with balls. Why is it a Steam Deck exclusive? Yeah, I guess because specifically it is only being programmed to use the gyro on the Steam Deck, which, yeah, I guess at a certain point there is something to that, in that the gyro specifically would be its own thing. Excuse me. Again, sorry. Terrible cough. Not going away. This is better with a friend. Concept really should be the kind of thing that was free with purchasing a Steam Deck, is to have some kind of mini games. So this is the game with balls game that will use the gyro of the Steam Deck. So weirdly, I guess this might be the first game specifically that is Steam Deck exclusive because it uses the gyro. Although, frankly, I wouldn't be surprised if there's a way this game could be played on any other kind of handheld as long as it had gyro, or even played without gyro at all. But yeah, there's been a lot of enthusiasm around making games compatible and playable on the Steam Deck, but there has been, so far, with the exception of these two games, no enthusiasm to make something that exclusively only works on the Steam Deck. Even the test demo free game Aperture Desk Job is a game that is playable, I believe, outside of the Steam Deck. Plus, it's worth pointing out that oh, what was I going to say? Lost my track of thought there. Yeah, the future for SteamOS more than likely is to be put into other devices that don't have gyro. I'm not sure if the Lenovo Legion Go S has gyro, and I don't think it is going to be mandatory that every handheld does have gyro, although frankly it would only cost you maybe $1 or $2 to add gyro to your handheld. With SteamOS not having an auto rotate feature, gyro becomes less useful there, although I can say that it looks like there is good development, and probably the next Waydroid for SteamOS update will have Android running with full rotation working when you rotate your Steam Deck. But yeah, the Steam Deck in particular is not designed to be rotated, even though it would make a lot of sense for some apps and maybe a few games if you could rotate the screen. There's just not a good hand grip that is around the Steam Deck, and they definitely should have thought about that as far as, can you rotate this thing and maybe lock the inputs on the touchpads and the analog sticks, so when you rotate it you are in like a reader mode that would let you play more portrait touchscreen games. Touchscreen on the Steam Deck also not very optimized and not used very often. It's easy to forget that the Steam Deck even has a touchscreen. So I guess this might have already been scheduled, or this might just be itch.io once again trying to change the narrative. A Queer Games Bundle 2025 is live. Apparently you can list things other than games on itch.io. I did not know that. Let's see. Payment processor drama is still going on. I would like to inherently see what the bundle is, but I really would just like to see a list of what the bundle is, and I don't think the game is gonna do that. Inherently LGBTQ plus content is going to start to get censored under the guise of sex adult games being censored, and since there's just going to be less of that content, since they're in the minority, or at least you would think there would be less of that content, that it will be even more impactful when censorship kicks in. And that has happened previously, before video games were even a thing, when censorship kicks in. Zoom platform also had payment processor issues, says they, quote, have no plans to remove any titles. Zoom platform sells a lot of retro games. Yeah, almost certainly everybody has had payment processor issues. And so Zoom platform is saying GTA, I assume that's GTA 1, Duke Nukem, I assume that's Duke Nukem 1, and Saints Row were described as potentially at risk. Which, I mean, those are pretty mainstream and pretty well-known games to be delisted, but there should be no delistings in my opinion. Anyways, or at least very minimal delistings based on things that are, I don't know if there's anything that should be censored really. I mean, it's just fiction. As long as you're not using live action actors, as long as you're not taking like pictures of kids and then morphing them to put them in situations they wouldn't be in situations, and like deep faking kids basically, I'd be fine with just about anything. If it's an originally fictional character that doesn't represent or even resemble anybody, you can do anything with them. Chop their head off, spit down their throat, whatever. I mean, art is art. Go as extreme as you want. Moving on, Heroes of Might and Magic 2 Project F Heroes 2 version 1.1.10 has been released. It does seem like there is kind of this competition happening between Heroes of Might and Magic 2 open source, I guess they're emulators? Maybe not. Open source engines and one. I can't help but think that the resolution is just so small on Heroes of Might and Magic 2 that you could probably play this on a cell phone and be fairly good. But yeah, this really, I think, highlights where the series probably needs a remake, reboot, more than it needs just to make a remaster. Particularly Heroes of Might and Magic 2 is going to have limited numbers of things you can build, and enemies you can fight, and enemies you can and levels you can play. If anything, it might be very easy to make coverage of Heroes of Might and Magic 2. I'm not sure that I've ever even played Heroes of Might and Magic 1 though. But yeah, it probably would take at least double the time, maybe 10 times the amount of time to cover properly Heroes of Might and Magic 3 versus Heroes of Might and Magic 2. If you're just going to try and go through a campaign mode. Yeah. They were definitely back in the day games you would get, and then they would keep you satisfied for at least a year, as the one game you get per year, potentially on Christmas, or 1 or 2 games you get per year for Christmas. Which, boy, were those the bad old days where you're getting a small handful of games every Christmas, and then you have to stretch it for an entire year. Moving on, Gaming on Linux has the Steam survey for July 2025 showing Linux is approaching 3%. Valve released the data for the Steam hardware and survey for July showing the Linux user share making gains hitting 3%. We continue to see slow but steady increases in the overall Linux share on the desktop. Good news for the health of the platform as more people realize just how good Linux is now. But yes, I do think Linux, Bazite Linux in particular, it would be my recommendation, has just become a lot better than it even was 4 or 5 years ago. A big part of this also is just people want to get away from Windows. You can see it declined by a little less than 0.5%. So all of the increase here and here for macOS is due to loss of this, which I guess it always would balance out that way anyways. And then SteamOS in particular, though, was down 2.73%. So it's not really even a case that a lot of people are getting Steam Decks or the Lenovo Legion Go S. It is people installing Arch Linux, which probably includes Bazite, but not really. It's people just separately installing Arch Linux, which would not have been what I thought people would pick first. But the bigger numbers, I guess, is CachyOS, which I haven't looked too much into that, and Fedora, and what are the big numbers? Another Fedora. So yeah, people are going out of their way to install Linux instead of going to Windows 11. But yeah, people have had it, I think, after being forced to upgrade to Windows 10 when people didn't want to, and possibly being forced to Windows 8 when people just wanted Windows 7, and possibly being forced to Windows 7 when people just wanted Windows, what was before 7? I mean, it wasn't XP, was it? Yeah. Well, it's basically been since XP that people actually were excited about upgrading a Windows version, and Windows 7 was the last operating system where you actively had to upgrade your Windows. After Windows 7, they were definitely pushing you down dark patterns of forcing you into Windows 8 and then forcing you into Windows 10. Completely lying that Windows 10 was going to be the last Windows ever and it was just constantly being updated, and now they're pushing you towards Windows 11. And in a few more years, they'll be trying to push you to Windows 12, I'm sure. You know, it'll just keep on happening. MasterCard, we already talked about the story as far as MasterCard kind of lying here, saying that they did not contact Valve directly, but it was their payment processors, which they have full control over, who actually contacted Valve to push the censorship. And specifically, I heard a podcaster say this is basically the example of MasterCard not being used to getting any complaint emails at all, or very minimal complaint emails, getting a few hundred complaint emails from Collective Shout, and thinking that's a big deal and that they're in the middle of a major controversy. So then they overreact and create censorship on Steam and get games delisted, for then MasterCard to learn the true nature of controversy once they get thousands upon thousands of calls and complaints. And there is definitely a call and complain campaign being suggested as far as calling MasterCard and being upset about that. And so MasterCard is getting a lot of pressure. Now, inherently, is MasterCard going to do anything about that pressure? I don't know. Very possibly not. They may just very well dig their heels in and decide that they were right all along and that they're going to continue to do it. They've been doing this. Payment processors and MasterCard and Visa and PayPal and Stripe have been doing this for years. Particularly, it's been very well known in Japan that it's been happening quite a bit, where the Japanese are less prudish than American and United States people are, and all of those companies are basically run by American and United States people. But once they came for games, they were not ready for the level of complaining that gamers were going to do. It is a sad statement, though, that of the many YouTubers and podcasts I've heard talk about this, almost all of them start with, this game isn't for me, or I don't really care that sex games, adult games are being censored. They inherently feel like they need to ensure that they maintain dignity and maintain this level of prudishness or properness before they then try to coalesce some kind of idea or statement together to say they are anti-censorship, when the reality is people should just be coming out and saying, I'm 100% against censorship in all forms. I mean, it's just that easy of a statement. And if you want to go more extreme, I have no problem with people enjoying adult games. If I wasn't a YouTube content creator personally, I would enjoy more adult games. I certainly have enjoyed adult content throughout my adult life, and like most young teenage kids, I enjoyed adult content before I should have been allowed to enjoy it. I expect and plan to enjoy adult content for the rest of my life, or at least until I'm such an old person that I am no longer interested in it. But even then, I would be anti-censorship and want society, mature, consenting adults or individuals to be able to enjoy adult content of whatever they're into. I fully reject the idea of fiction promoting a mentality or culture. One of the arguments Collective Shout is making is that incest is just always considered non-consensual, which I fully reject that as a concept too. If in a fictional story 2 40-year-olds happen to be related and they want to engage in romance, I see no reason in fictional stories for that to not happen. And no point do I think there's just an implied non-consent. And that is certainly a lot of the wiggle words and things that are being thrown around to promote censorship, is that they're trying to get people to use different words, like saying grape, so it loses its impact, so it loses its meaning, and so that they can recontextualize or apply a level of yellow journalism to what is being discussed or what is being said. Often it is the phrase illegal. They'll say something is illegal, and maybe they don't even mean as in the United States illegal, but maybe they mean illegal as in MasterCard's rules 5.12.7 is illegal, if they use that same phrase, where when you hear the phrase illegal, you would assume that it is actually illegal. Of course, you could also say something is illegal because it's illegal in like Dubai, when it's completely legal in the country you're living in too. So, yeah, a lot of wiggle words, and I wish more people would stand up and say they are against censorship in all forms, and that everything should be allowed for adults. Maybe I would be willing to listen to an argument of censoring and only having age-appropriate content for people who are underage, or maybe people who have been determined by courts, if you could really trust judges and courts, to have a mental level that would make them underage, even if they physically are overage. But even that is certainly iffy as far as deeming someone as being mentally underage so they can't enjoy something they want to enjoy. Yeah, and I guess I'll leave it at that. Well, I guess I can't leave it at that too much. Itch.io is going to re-index its free content as they search for new payment processors. Some of these are gaming on Linux articles that we must have opened manually. They've upgraded their video player and re-encoded around 400,000 videos. Although it seems like it's only the video player directly on the Steam page. It's not all the video players they might be using. They may still be working on it. Tycoon strategy game Car Park Capital gets a new trailer and publisher announcement. I don't know if Microprose is a parody of Micro Machines or if that's a real toy that existed. It's probably not a game for me, but I'll make a YouTube short on it. Nexus Mod app adds collective creation, library searching, and more improvements. Collections creation, not collective creation. The free and open source 2D graphics editor Pixie Editor 2.0 now is out now with Linux support. But yeah, that's the kind of thing I would like to see if the kid I gave a Steam Deck to would be interested in playing with, and maybe reporting back to me to see how good of a editor it is. It is looking a lot like Photoshop, which in general every photo editor is going to look a lot like Photoshop, but I think there is actual some levels of node animation also happening with it, so you're making one frame of either a pixely or vector based type image, and then you're changing it for the next frame to animate. Well, I guess maybe that's not all of it though. It seems like the nodes also are applying filters and changes, which I don't think that's the way Photoshop works. Yeah, and I'm pretty sure the free GNU image manipulation tool called GIMP doesn't work with nodes, although the newest version might. Yeah, nodes I think make a lot more sense in photo editing, because it means you wouldn't be linearly editing things as much, where you would have to undo like 5 steps of doing something if you made a mistake, or you'd have to make copies of layers and redo things. But yeah, there is some level of animation here with the Pixie editor, and definitely feels like there's enough of a level of professionalism here where you could use this as a professional tool if you were the artist in a game development environment. Although it is, yeah, they're taking a direct swipe at Creative Cloud Photoshop. It is probably not industry standard as far as an app, since it's brand new. So learning to use Pixie Editor might not really help you too much if you were going to end up working for the likes of Microsoft or EA or Ubisoft or something like that. But it's free and it's totally worth checking out if you are trying to make your own independent game and do it all yourself, or if you just want to play around with it. And it has that extra advantage, certainly as far as software goes, in being free, that you can have it potentially launch on a Steam Deck, and I'd be very interested in knowing how well this interface forms itself and resizes itself for a Steam Deck interface, and whether the touchscreen actually helps any. Moving on, lossless scale framing generation for Linux hits 1.0 with a new UI making it easier than ever. These are older stories, so don't need to talk about them too much. Move on from that. And then Valve revealed the Steam events for the first half of 2026, which is not particularly too interesting. The next fest is happening in February 23rd through the March 2nd, and then there's a bunch of other fests. And then halfway after May, halfway through this, they start mentioning this year's fest still to come, with the autumn sale being September 29th through October 6th, which is a different time from the previous autumn sale, and then the winter sale happening December 18th through January 5th. And I guess at this point they have split fests as being, hey, we're celebrating something, and away from sales. And maybe that has always been the labeling on how things happen, and I just now am recognizing it. That's very possible. But yeah, there basically are, I guess, only 4 things that are actually labeled as sales, where the other fests imply that some games might be discounted, but there's going to be a small collection of games, nowhere as big as a summer sale or fall sale. GameDeveloper.com articles now. Moving on. This is the new decision they have done to do this pop-up and check for letting you have cookies. And so I've gotten rid of that pop-up. GameDeveloper.com says we fought hard. Raven QA union secures contract after 3 years of bargaining. The agreement includes guaranteed wage increases and layoff protections. Yep, this is the QA team specifically. Game Workers Alliance, that's CWA. Communications Workers Alliance. It's the name of the union. And yeah, QA people, I think more than anybody, need layoff protections, although pretty much anybody who is not a manager in a game company, I think, needs layoff protections of some sort. Question is always going to be, is it too little too late? And I guess there's nothing you can really do about that, but there is a real concern that we may just see a massive amount of layoffs happen before people can get unionized. The video game industry effectively have massive amounts of brain drain, and then we just have garbage games getting churned out by AI slop generators for years upon years, which I guess if there is just no new games to play, that would give me more time to catch up, but that wouldn't be good for the industry, and certainly it requires just a whole new group of companies to hire people and start making games again, and maybe a whole new generation of game developers who are going to be doing things differently or learning from scratch how to make games, which could only prolong a long period of just very bad games and very cheap games. And every new company that tries to start up to be a video game company is going to feel some pressure to use the AI, and so you still may get a ton of AI slop, even from people trying to be good game developers. So it definitely feels like dark days ahead could happen. But there is, I suppose, also a possibility that just enough game developers and QA people get unionization protection, and that just slows a overall decline of the game industry enough to keep it in business for several decades more, and keep good games to come out for several decades more. That is also a possibility, I guess. Let's see. Valve pushes back after MasterCard denies quashing adult content on game platforms. MasterCard said it has not evaluated any games or required restrictions of any activity on game creator sites and platforms, but Valve begs to differ. So here we have GameDeveloper.com also claiming the same thing. And this statement this time was sent to Kotaku, so it's GameDeveloper.com really just using Kotaku as a source instead of Gaming on Linux as a source, which, yeah, we will leave it at that. Is this a real credit card, or probably not? These are probably honeypot codes, if I was to guess, and that if anybody tried to use this information, which expired in 23 anyways, it would get red flagged immediately. But generally, when you see a stock image of somebody using a credit card, it's just like 555 5555 all the way through, and pretty obviously a fake one. And yeah, if that's how you're stealing credit cards, you're doing it the absolute worst way possible. As far as the many different ways people steal credit cards, doing it from a stock image would be one of the worst. Although, in fairness, if you could scan like every single image posted to Twitter as fast as possible, probably would have a decent number of people accidentally posting a picture of their credit cards every now and then. But I mean, you're not going to get anywhere with that level of criminal activity. Just be a weed dealer, you make more money and get caught less often. Alright, moving on from that terrible advice. Don't listen to me for life advice, kids. Nintendo raises the price for the Switch 1 hardware and Switch 2 accessories in the US. Are they raising the price for Switch 2 accessories again? I think maybe that is the case. Yeah. The Alarmo sound clock also was getting increased in price, and I've heard absolutely nobody say anything about that. That was an overpriced gimmick device when it first came out. I'm surprised they're still selling it at all. Alright, and so we have managed to go through all of the news. It all opened up. Seems like we're in a nice caught up position. And so before we go through all the new games on Steam, I'm going to take another short break, and then I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back and hopefully not going. Okay, I'm back now. Oh, and hopefully not cough into your head. Yeah, I apparently misclicked there and didn't unpause the recording. Going through all of the new games on Steam now. You know what grinds my gears these days is that despite, I think, a decent effort on my part, I have still not been able to find any kind of pre-made, small packaged snack that is not just a packet of M&Ms or candy, or just pure sugar, which is a real shame. I mean, I do have a packet of crackers that I could eat those, but that also is kind of awkward. But I don't know. Like, and then I've had cheese sticks. Certainly, those things are not really going on sale, though, and they're kind of expensive. And I guess you could have protein drinks. That might be fairly healthy, but that's more of a liquid snack. Yeah. I guess just the question here is, where's my meat cubes or veggie cubes? Things like that, as far as an idea, as far as just we're going to have small bite-sized congealed vegetables or congealed proteins. Or bite-sized, I guess maybe carbs. Yeah, the problem constantly for everybody is that sugar is more addictive and cheaper to sell than anything else, and easier I guess it's probably easier to form. Yeah, I saw a couple of things like Progresso has more like smoked soups, stews, as far as a new the flavor series they're trying out, which might be interesting. And apparently there is a type of mycelium mushroom that you can get in the form of fake bacon called My Bacon, MY space bacon, and it is taking the roots of mushrooms, the mycelium, and forming it and cutting it in a certain way so that you have this mushroom product that you just fry up in a pan, and it tastes something fairly close to bacon from what I can tell, which fairly close to bacon is always the caveat there. Increasingly though, I think we will see more and more mushroom based products. I've seen mushroom hot cocos to help you sleep. I've seen mushroom coffees. So there is a growing desire to do more with mushrooms. I also have one company has figured out how to use mycelium mushrooms effectively to form packaging, which is more biodegradable than using cardboard or recycled paper or plastic or glass, certainly. So yeah, more uses for mushrooms. We need just another revolution of somebody figuring out a million different ways to cheaply use mushrooms, in the same way that somebody found million different uses for peanuts in the old days. And we'll probably have mushroom allergies pop up in people at some point in the future, if I was to guess, for the same overusage. But yeah, what was the other thing they were doing with mushrooms? I've seen a lot of people trying to do a lot of different things with it. Of course, you could just eat mushrooms. Oh yeah, they were straight up air farming mushrooms, so they found a way to just grow mushrooms into big fruiting balls full of probably spores too, but the fruits of the mushroom, the caps, in basically shipping containers that don't like light, so they don't have to run any light, and they just have to kind of throw in a bunch of basically branches and sticks and twigs, tree barks, for the mushrooms to grow on. And that it, in that way in which they were doing air farming, is I think what they called it, of the mushrooms, they can just kind of run their hand around spots and grab big balls of mushrooms and then take that further down a processing path to turn into food. Of course, it is also worth pointing out that they've been talking about golden rice for years, and that never really has arrived as something that people can eat in at least the United States. The idea of rice with more protein in it, and I think maybe calcium in it. So I think what golden rice was supposed to be. There definitely are one or two YouTubers I follow that make an entire career of promising some brave new technology discovery that's going to change everything, and is only a few months away from being implemented, but it's always a few months from being implemented. Like, inherently, with me trying to investigate why my house is using so much electricity, it might be the case that my air conditioner is just really inefficient. It might also be that my house is just way too big and not very well insulated, which is probably true. But yeah, there might be an argument to, if the air conditioner actually broke, replace it with a heat pump kind of air conditioner, if such a thing was actually financially viable and available. One of the things about heat pump air conditioners in particular, I'm going to say no to yet another clean minesweeper. Yeah. Oh, you know what? I'll give it a chance, actually. Yeah, one of the things about heat pump air conditioners, though, is that if they have the right controls on it, it can be much more of a thing where it tries to adjust itself up and down for consistent temperatures instead of just shutting itself off completely once the thermostat says you've reached the temperature we want, and then waiting 20 minutes and then the temperature changing and then the thermostat kicking it back in at full blast. Generally speaking, most things do not work at 100% efficiency when they are running at 100% of their rated load, and I think that is very much the truth for your standard air conditioner, compressor, and fan setup. And so, yeah, if you have a heat pump that says you run at 50% and maintain, or start cooling a little bit more at 75% because we have a thermometer on the outside, and we know that outside is getting a little bit hotter. It could create much more efficient thing setup, one hopes. Of course, again, these kinds of future tech promises very well may be all just smoke and mirror, where they may actually do what they say, but they may be way too expensive, not actually saving you anything. But yeah, I was talking to my neighbor earlier today as my macros were running, and he said that probably about 15 years or longer ago he replaced an air conditioner in his house with a more efficient one, and it was paying for itself. He financed it, so it was paying for the monthly finance bill in savings of electricity until the financing had been paid off. And I don't know if he really saved as much as he thinks he did if you go through financing. Then the new air conditioner lasted maybe 5 more years before planned obsolescence probably kicked in and broke it. But one would assume that even then, if he got a new air conditioner 15 years ago and then 10 years after that he got a new air conditioner, one would assume that that is still just going to be more efficient. Like motors in particular have fairly drastically improved in quality, and I know that there's a kind of expensive motor that is really good in quality that might very well be something that should be in air conditioners. But yeah, it like brushed motors were way less efficient than brushless motors. And then there is a really expensive motor that has circuitry in it to be like a brushless motor, but with even more sensors to maintain a consistent amount of efficiency. I don't even really know how it would work now that I think about it. First adult game we're actually concerned about is called Last Heist. Looks like a survival horror game, and it was last updated 14 months ago. Was it tagged with mature content? Is the tag. I probably should not censor things that are just tagged mature. You probably should just change that. Yeah. Now, should I make a YouTube short on this? Nah. So, went through a lot of work there. Didn't even show you the game at the end because I screwed up there. Good thing I caught it. Yeah. And only made one mistake. That is a thing also about running PC Shop Simulator. If somebody would be so kind as to watch every second of my footage, you are going to definitely see that there are some points where I just screw things up and make tiny mistakes. And I don't think that's really uncommon for most people. It's definitely not uncommon for me. But yeah, just on a day-to-day basis, if I was repairing computers, there is more than likely some that would be getting the wrong RAM. This next adult game is called Liese, L-I-E-S-E, in the City of Trials. It's an RPG maker. It is tagged as not safe for work, and well, I guess I should actually look. Not safe for work, nudity, hentai. Also, the only thing it doesn't have is mature as a tag. Definitely is your standard RPG maker looking game. Which, yeah, if we're going to really talk about censorship, if anything would have gone under the radar and people wouldn't have cared about it, is if all of a sudden there was a whole bunch of RPG Maker adult games removed from Steam. I don't think too many people would complain at all about that, because the RPG Maker games also tend not to even go into fetishes. One content creator calls them flavors that are interesting. They tend to be pretty garbage even as adult games. Now this is interesting because we burned through all of those games pretty fast. So I guess we have to assume it was just a slow weekend, because August 2nd here is when this game came out. We can briefly look at the fall list cleanup. This is that game Primal Planet. King is Watching is doing a public test of mid-run save feature. Patch 13 for 9 Kings. Naya Jewel Hunter is adding a free camera mode and improvements. And yeah, I think the rest of this would be stuff that we had already looked at. And Mycopunk sounds like a game that has mushrooms in it too, if we're following a theme of things. Mushrooms. So yeah, this game is rated very positively. It only has 126 things. It came out July 28th. So this is about as fast as I could possibly think I would ever play a brand new game without just running a gamble and buying something as soon as I saw it and playing it as soon as I saw it. Which in part the YouTube shorts are kind of trying to do, that gamble without actually spending any money. Of course, there's been no new updates as far as whether or not I think my YouTube shorts would ever help me or hurt me get monetized if I ever got another 1,000 to 2,000 watch hours, which is really my goal. I wish it would happen, but I'm also somewhat giving up on that, as far as I'm running out of cash to wait for that dream to come true. But anyways, talking about this game, this is a Metroidvania game, and Metroidvania game set in a jungle where you're playing as cavemans sounds very appealing as far as a twist. And my only, I guess, real concern is that maybe the abilities you get as a caveman might be a little ridiculous, or that the game itself might just be a little small. You can see here they spoil something in that you start to see aliens show up too. So there's, well, I guess they spoil it right at this point too, as far as aliens are included, so I guess that wasn't a big secret. So yeah. But again, you're not going to get a major discount on this. You're going to get 10% discount at most for at least the first 6 months of something being out. Alright, well, that's going to be it for this show. I started late, so we're ending late, but not that late, so at least I can not feel terrible about running too late.